What if I told you a peaceful morning jog could turn into a full-blown suburban battlefield? That a simple welcome to the neighborhood could hide a web of corruption, intimidation, and backyard espionage? In Oak Hollow, the flowers were trimmed, the lawns were perfect, and the HOA ruled like a bad high school government on a power trip. Until they made one fatal mistake. They messed with the wrong woman. A woman who didn't just survive suburban tyranny, she dismantled it piece by piece, with a smile, a pen, and the kind of training they make action movies about. From armed cosplay cops in golf carts to secret recordings, federal investigations, and the most epic HOA takedown you've ever heard, this story has it all. Betrayals, plot twists, a trench-flipping golf cart chase, and a quiet warrior who changed everything without ever raising her voice. If you think HOA drama is just about lawn heights and mailbox colors, think again. Hit that subscribe button and join us here at Real HOA Drama, where the battles are petty, but the victories are legendary. You don't want to miss how this neighborhood fought back and won. It was supposed to be a peaceful morning, the kind where the coffee brews slow, the sun slices through the blinds just right, and you think, yeah, maybe suburbia isn't so bad after all. Sarah had laced up her running shoes, tossed on her favorite gray hoodie, and kissed me on the forehead before heading out for a quick jog around our new neighborhood. I was 3 sips into my coffee, and halfway through arguing with a stubborn line of code, when the motion alert from our porch camera lit up my phone. At first, I figured it was a delivery truck or maybe one of the neighbors' overly ambitious cats. Instead, when I clicked into the feed, I saw something that made my stomach drop. 2 matte black HOA golf carts parked like barricades across our quiet street, lights flashing in that cheap Halloween store blue. And there, in the middle of it all, stood my wife, calm, still, hands slightly raised, while a man in an ill-fitting tactical vest pointed a pistol square at her chest. I dropped my mug. It shattered against the floor, but I didn't even flinch. My heart thundered in my ears as I bolted for the door, not thinking, not breathing, just moving. By the time I hit the front lawn, the scene had gotten even weirder. Captain Wannabe Cop was shouting something about IDs and restricted areas, holding his weapon sideways like he'd learned firearms safety from an 80s action movie marathon. 2 backup dancers, officers, hovered awkwardly behind him, unsure whether they were supposed to look tough or just ready to faint. Sarah, bless her, didn't even blink. She kept her breathing slow, her shoulders relaxed. Only I, who knew her better than anyone, noticed the tiny twitch in her right hand, a tell so subtle you'd miss it unless you'd spent years watching her switch from mom mode to mission mode without skipping a beat. "Sir," she said, voice even almost bored, "I'm going to ask you one time to lower your weapon. For your own safety." You could almost hear the neighbors peeking through their blinds, holding their breath. Somewhere, a lawn sprinkler clicked to life, the only sound in the electric stillness. Of course, Captain Clipboard didn't listen. He sneered, squaring his feet like he thought he was about to make an arrest that would get him a medal, or at least a free sandwich at the clubhouse. That's when it happened. Blink, and the gun was on the grass. Blink again, and he was flat on his stomach, his arm twisted behind him in a hold so clean, so surgically precise, it probably had a NATO designation. Sarah crouched low, whispering something into his ear that I couldn't hear, but judging by the way his eyes bulged, it wasn't a pep talk. The 2 backup officers just stood there, looking like they wished they'd called in sick. I was frozen halfway down the driveway, torn between sprinting to help and just standing there in awe, because my wife, my beautiful, terrifying wife, had just neutralized an armed threat before I'd even had time to put on real pants. Moments later, real police cruisers rolled up, lights flashing. One officer took one look at the scene, asked Sarah for ID, read whatever she showed him, and then nodded with a sharpness that told me he knew exactly who she was. "Ma'am, you're good to go," he said, while the HOA vigilantes sputtered about citizen authority and trespassing. As the cruisers pulled away, I caught Sarah's eye. She shrugged like it was just another Tuesday. I wanted to laugh, cry, and build a shrine in her honor, all at once. Instead, I just muttered, "Next time, maybe take your ID or, a tank." She smirked and jogged past me, hoodie swaying, leaving the would-be warrior sobbing into his tactical vest. Welcome to the neighborhood. Moving into the neighborhood had felt like stepping into the glossy pages of a real estate brochure, the kind with sun-drenched porches, smiling neighbors, and promises of community spirit in curly gold letters. Sarah and I had driven through the entrance gates with the kind of naive optimism usually reserved for lottery winners and new puppy owners. The place was immaculate. Freshly trimmed hedges. Flower beds that could have won state fair ribbons. Streets so clean you could eat off them. It was exactly what we thought we needed. And then we met Karen Brewster. Karen introduced herself the same way a lion might introduce itself to a wounded gazelle, all smiles, but with something sharp behind her eyes. She arrived at our door exactly 37 minutes after we unloaded our last moving box, clipboard in hand, name tag the size of a license plate swinging from her neck. "Welcome to our sanctuary," she said, as if she were personally responsible for every blade of grass. She handed us a thick packet labeled HOA Community Standards, capitalized like it was a holy text, and immediately launched into an unsolicited tour of our own property. No drying laundry outside. No lawn decorations taller than 15 inches. No recreational activities that could be construed as intimidating, she said, pausing to level a pointed glance at Sarah, who, bless her, smiled so sweetly I half expected a halo to appear. I flipped through the booklet later that night and found gems like, grass must not exceed 2.75 inches, and all holiday decorations must be removed within 48 hours post-event. I half expected a subsection about acceptable lawn gnome political affiliations. But it wasn't just the rules. It was the atmosphere. The way Karen walked the sidewalks like a border patrol agent, eyes scanning for infractions. The way her laminated badge seemed less like a welcome mat and more like a threat. Then there were the golf carts. Oh, the golf carts. 4 of them, lined up outside the HOA clubhouse like a suburban version of a SWAT team, if SWAT teams had cup holders and bumper stickers about community pride. Each cart was painted matte black, emblazoned with bold white letters, HSD, Home Safety Division. One even had blue lights zip-tied to the roof, flashing weakly like a birthday candle gasping its last breath. At first, I thought it was some quirky HOA tradition. You know, parades or kids' events. Harmless.
Wrong.
The first time I saw them roll by at midnight, patrolling the sidewalks at 5 miles per hour, I realized this wasn't about fun. It was about control. Karen's army wasn't here to throw block parties. They were here to make sure your trash cans were exactly 3.5 feet apart, and God help you if your mailbox flag leaned left. Still, we kept our heads down, smiled politely, pretended we didn't notice the creeping sense that we'd moved into a Stepford movie set run by mall cops. And that's when we met Greg Sanders. Greg was the first neighbor to actually introduce himself without a clipboard or an aura of impending doom. Friendly, balding, wearing a World's Okayest Golfer t-shirt, he wandered over one afternoon as I was wrestling with a stubborn garden hose. "Welcome to paradise," he said with a chuckle, handing me a cold bottle of water. "Don't mind the golf carts. It's mostly for show." We chatted easily. He joked about Karen's obsession with order and the funny little rules. He even warned me, half laughing, to keep my Christmas lights tasteful unless I wanted a citation. I liked Greg immediately. He felt normal. Like maybe this place wasn't as bad as it seemed. I didn't know then that Greg wasn't just another weary resident trying to survive Karen's reign. He was her eyes and ears. The first seed of trouble had been planted. We just hadn't seen it sprout yet. The emergency meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. sharp, but by 6:30, the parking lot outside the HOA clubhouse looked like a tailgate party had collided with a Roman tribunal. Lawn chairs sprouted across the grass like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Someone had wheeled in a popcorn machine. A few brave souls even brought coolers stacked with cheap beer, muttering about how this was better than Thursday night football. Sarah didn't want me to go. She sat on our porch, sipping tea, a half-smirk playing on her lips as she watched me pull on my wife's other ride is a Blackhawk t-shirt, the one that always seemed to make security guards nervous, and grab a notebook just for effect. "You don't have to do this," she said. I absolutely do, I replied, because when your wife nearly gets shot by a cosplay cop and the HOA decides she's the villain, you show up, loud, proud, and petty. Inside, Karen Brewster stood at the front of the room like she was about to address the United Nations during a crisis summit. Behind her, a whiteboard displayed the words, Emergency Response Strategy, in thick, dramatic lettering. Someone, probably Captain Clipboard himself, had drawn stick figures depicting a threat actor, with angry eyebrows, and a heroic defense officer, with sunglasses and bulging biceps that were pure fantasy. Karen adjusted her microphone 3 times, each movement more theatrical than the last, then opened with a deep, mournful sigh. Neighbors, she said, her voice heavy with manufactured sorrow, it is with a heavy heart that I report a violent assault on one of our peacekeepers. Peacekeepers. She actually said it with a straight face, like we lived in a war-torn country instead of a sleepy cul-de-sac where the biggest emergency last month was a raccoon tipping over the recycling bin. She gestured dramatically toward Captain Clipboard, who sat to the side in a folding chair, arm in a sling, looking like he regretted every life choice that led him to this moment. His face was a mixture of embarrassment, lactose intolerance, and vague rage. Captain Fredrickson, Karen intoned, was injured protecting our community from a known threat. My hand shot up so fast I nearly dislocated my shoulder. Yes, Mr. Owens, Karen said, trying to keep her smile intact. Quick question, I said, as innocently as I could manage. What's the known history? Because, I live with Sarah, and unless you're referring to that one time she yelled at the toaster, I'm not aware of any violent tendencies. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Karen's eye twitched. Mr. Owens, we ask that you refrain from sarcastic commentary. Got it, I said, nodding seriously. Just facts. Like the fact that your officer pulled a gun on my wife while she was jogging. The tension snapped taut enough to hum. Even people who'd been cautiously neutral shifted in their seats. Karen stumbled for a second, then tried to recover. There were signs of suspicious behavior. She was listening to a crime podcast. I blinked. While jogging. Karen pounced. Exactly. Consuming criminal content suggests criminal intent. Someone actually snorted behind me. That's when I pulled out the USB stick I'd brought. Funny you should mention that, I said, handing it to the teenager running the community projector. Here's the full body cam footage. Karen paled visibly. The lights dimmed. The projector whirred to life. On screen, there was Sarah, hoodie up, earbuds in, jogging at a casual pace. The golf cart screeched to a halt. Captain Clipboard barked incoherent orders. Sarah paused, confused. The gun appeared, and in under 3 seconds, she had him on the ground without so much as a scratch on his bloated ego. When the footage ended, the room was dead silent. Not the scared, cowed silence Karen thrived on. No. This was the heavy, smoldering silence of a crowd that realized they'd been played and didn't appreciate it. Someone in the back muttered, "She should be running the HOA." Karen slammed her clipboard down on the podium, but the damage was done. The cracks had started, and they were only going to get wider. After the chaos of the emergency meeting, Sarah didn't celebrate. She didn't smirk, gloat, or even pop open a victory beer like I had silently hoped she would. Instead, she sat on our back porch, tapping a pen rhythmically against her thigh, her eyes distant and sharp, the same look I'd seen once when she mapped out escape routes on vacation, just in case. When Sarah went quiet like that, you knew something was brewing. Something tactical. "We need proof," she said finally, voice low enough that even the crickets had to lean in to hear. Not just that they're idiots. Proof they're dirty. I blinked. Dirtier than pulling guns on joggers? She smiled grimly. Much dirtier. That's when Operation Deep Dive was born. Sarah didn't waste time. Within 24 hours, she had assembled what I could only describe as a suburban espionage kit, a lipstick-sized recording device disguised as a pen, a modified key fob with a built-in mic, and a tiny pinhole camera small enough to pass for a smudge on the clubhouse bookshelf. If Amazon had a Spy Essentials for taking down corrupt HOAs category, she'd have left a glowing 5-star review. under the cover of darkness, and by that I mean around 8:15 p.m. when the neighborhood vampires retired to polish their clipboards. Sarah made her move. She slipped into the clubhouse during one of the private board meetings Karen loved to host, where actual minutes were never taken but plenty of bad decisions were surely made. The pen recorder slid neatly into a potted fern by the podium, the camera tucked behind a commemorative plaque reading Community First, with a big, gaudy American flag.
It was almost too easy.
Security was laughable. The Home Safety Division officers were too busy debating which tactical belt was more intimidating to notice anything. For the next 2 weeks, Sarah collected audio like a kid hoarding Halloween candy. We spent our evenings with popcorn in hand, listening to the greatest hits of HOA corruption. Karen ranting about problem neighbors who dared plant unauthorized tulips. Captain Clipboard bragging about issuing fake fines to pay for equipment upgrades, which apparently included his new golf cart with a built-in mini fridge. Snippets of conversations about redirecting funds for beautification projects that sounded suspiciously like somebody's private home renovations. But the real jackpot came late one Thursday night. Karen, clearly feeling untouchable, boasted about their partnership with a landscaping company called Verdant Horizon LLC. Supposedly, Verdant Horizon had been paid hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past few years for installing fountains, paving roads, and upgrading community spaces. Funny thing was, we hadn't seen a single new fountain, or a single repaved road. And the public gardens they bragged about?
Yeah.
That was just a couple of weeds throwing a block party behind the dumpster. Sarah cross-referenced the payment records, obtained legally through public HOA filings, because she knew exactly how to make a paper trail bleed, and matched them to security footage. Date after date showed nothing but empty lots, cracked sidewalks, and Karen's smug face occasionally waddling across the frame. Verdant Horizon wasn't a real company. It was a shell, registered to a cousin of Captain Clipboard himself. They hadn't been landscaping the community. They'd been landscaping their bank accounts. I stared at the evidence spread out on our dining room table, screenshots, bank transfers, grainy footage, and let out a slow, disbelieving whistle. You know, I said, grinning, some couple's scrapbook. We take down local governments. Sarah didn't even look up from organizing her files. Everyone needs a hobby. And just like that, the operation moved into phase 2. Proof was good. But justice? Justice was coming. It's funny how paperwork, the very thing Karen worshipped, ended up becoming her greatest enemy. Sarah spent one long Saturday assembling everything. Every misused dollar. Every fake project. Every shady wire transfer connected to Verdant Horizon LLC. She bound it all up neatly into a black folder, so thick it could have doubled as a doorstop. Then, without fanfare, she submitted it to a federal auditing office that handled financial misconduct in private associations. The kind of office that didn't send polite emails. The kind that sent subpoenas. Now, Sarah said, tapping the folder like it was a loaded weapon. We wait. But Karen, bless her paranoid little heart, didn't sit idle. She knew, somehow, that something had shifted. Maybe it was the way neighbors had started waving at each other without fear. Maybe it was the slight tilt in the atmosphere, like the moment right before a storm breaks. So she did what any unqualified dictator with delusions of grandeur would do. She hired a private investigator. And not just any PI. No, Karen clearly consulted the yellow pages under creeps and clowns. Because the guy tailing us looked like he had fallen straight out of a failed detective TV pilot. Cheap sunglasses. Cheap mustache. Even cheaper tactics. He wasn't subtle. Not even a little. The first time I saw him, he was parked across the street, pretending to read a newspaper. Except it was upside down. Another time, he crouched behind a trash can, peeking over the lid like a raccoon trying to file a police report. At first I was angry, violated, ready to go full suburban dad, and demand to see his permit. But Sarah? Sarah just smiled. That slow, dangerous smile that made my skin tingle in a way that was only partly fear. Let's give him something to record, she said. Operation Bait the PI commenced. We started walking our dog, who we didn't own, 3 times a day. Thanks, neighbor Lisa, for loaning out Sparky. We had extremely loud, extremely fake conversations about moving the package and meeting our contact at the safe house, which was, of course, just the Home Depot garden center. I even wore my old Halloween costume, a fake CIA windbreaker, and asked loudly if the drop site was secure. The PI recorded it all diligently, probably thinking he was blowing the lid off the suburban scandal of the century. Then came the fun part. Sarah, ever the professional, doubled back one evening while I kept walking Sparky in circles like an idiot. She caught the PI crouched behind a mailbox, fiddling with what looked suspiciously like a cheap directional mic. And she filmed him. Full high-def, time-stamped, with our street signs clearly in frame. The look on his face when he realized she was filming him? Chef's kiss. When he tried to retreat, Sarah casually blocked his path with a single step and asked, sweet as pie, "Can I help you, sir?" He mumbled something about a misunderstanding, practically tripped over the curb, and fled in his battered sedan with a muffler that sounded like a dying moose. That footage? Oh. We made sure it found its way into the federal complaint package, along with a fresh note, targeted harassment of witnesses under ongoing investigation. By the time Karen realized her PI had become Exhibit A in her own downfall, it was too late. The feds were coming, and no amount of laminated badges was going to stop them. At first, the shift was subtle, like the first few raindrops before a thunderstorm. You could feel it in the way people started looking up when they walked their dogs, not down. The way front porch lights stayed on a little later at night. The way parents let their kids ride bikes down the street without clutching a rulebook in one hand and a citation appeal form in the other. Karen didn't notice it immediately. She was too busy fortifying the clubhouse like it was the Alamo, slapping new signs on the doors. Authorized personnel only and security zone, no unauthorized entry, complete with badly photocopied clip-art shields. But the residents noticed. Oh boy, did they notice. It started when Mrs. Hillman, retired lawyer, baking enthusiast, and general neighborhood grandma, left a single flyer under everyone's doormat. Simple.
Clean.
Professional. Where your money goes, and where IT doesn't. It listed the HOA's so-called expenditures side by side with actual photographs of the improvements, or rather, the total lack thereof. 2 fountains? More like 2 broken sprinklers. 30 public gardens? More like a weed convention behind the dumpsters. The next morning, more flyers appeared. Then lawn signs. Glorious, sarcastic lawn signs. My personal favorite was planted right outside Karen's house, a smiling emoji with the caption, "Smile, you're being fined." Another showed a cartoon golf cart outfitted with flashing lights, driven by a goose in a tactical vest. The artistry escalated quickly. One neighbor, a guy I only knew as Steve with the loud Mustang, built an actual cardboard checkpoint at the community entrance, complete with a fake barricade and a sign reading, "Checkpoint Karen, papers, please." The best part?
People laughed.
Real, genuine, cathartic laughter, the kind that had been missing for far too long. Karen, naturally, reacted the way a dictator facing a karaoke revolution would.
With threats.
She fired off a neighborhood-wide bulletin that afternoon, delivered via official HOA email stamped with a dozen unnecessary exclamation points. Unauthorized signage will result in immediate fines and potential legal action, including but not limited to lien placement, suspension of amenity access, and mandatory decorum training sessions. Decorum training. Like we were unruly toddlers, and she was going to teach us how to fold our napkins properly while she confiscated our constitutional rights. For a hot second, the air buzzed with uncertainty. Some neighbors, the ones who still had HOA trauma in their bones, hesitated. But then someone, and I swear I will find out who and bake them a cake, posted a meme to the community Facebook page. Karen's head photoshopped onto the Statue of Liberty, holding a clipboard instead of a torch, with the words, "Give me your weary, you're fined. Your citation notices yearning to breathe free." That was it. That was the breaking point. By sunset, half the houses on our street had signs. Kids chalked Freedom Zone on the sidewalks. Someone even organized an unofficial HOA-free barbecue on the common green. Hot dogs, fireworks, and absolutely no permits. And when Karen's Home Safety Division goons tried to show up in their golf carts to issue warnings, they were booed off the property, politely of course, because we're civilized. Sarah and I watched it all unfold from our porch, sipping lemonade like we were spectators at the best damn show in town. Sarah didn't say much, just smiled that slow, satisfied smile that meant the tide had officially turned. Karen had ruled through fear. But once you teach people how to laugh at fear, you break its back. And oh boy, Karen's back was about to snap. The city council chambers smelled faintly of old coffee, floor wax, and civic disappointment. Rows of hard plastic chairs creaked under the weight of every concerned citizen, every nosy neighbor, and every HOA conspiracy theorist who wanted a front-row seat to watch Karen Brewster's empire either fall or explode. Preferably both. Sarah and I got there early, slipping into seats near the middle. She wore jeans, boots, and a plain black t-shirt, no fanfare, no frills. She looked like exactly what she was: serious, steady, unshakable. Karen, on the other hand, arrived 20 minutes late, hauling a binder roughly the size of a small child and flanked by one of her Home Safety Division goons, who wore sunglasses indoors like he thought he was auditioning for a bad cop drama. The council president, an older man with kind eyes and a voice like worn leather, rapped his gavel once. "We're here to review allegations concerning the governance of Oak Hollow HOA," he said, his tone clipped and professional. Petition brought forth by resident parties concerning financial misconduct, abuse of authority, and resident harassment. Karen practically vibrated with indignation. Sarah? She stood up like she was walking onto a firing range she had memorized years ago. When she spoke, it wasn't angry. It wasn't even loud. It was surgical. She laid out everything. The fake landscaping company Verdant Horizon LLC. The non-existent upgrades. The fabricated security protocols used to fine and intimidate residents. The misuse of community funds redirected into shell accounts tied to Karen's inner circle. Audio recordings, time-stamped footage, public records. Even the footage of Karen's private investigator crouched behind a mailbox like a confused meerkat. Every word was a brick in the wall she was building, solid, undeniable, permanent. Karen tried to interrupt once, stood up waving a sheet of paper like it was a holy writ, but the council president cut her off with a look so sharp it could have trimmed hedges. When Sarah finished, there was a beat of silence, so profound you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Then the council president leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. "Mrs. Owens," he said, voice even. "Would you mind clarifying your background for the record?" Sarah gave a polite nod. "I am currently active in a classified capacity within a U.S. Army Tier 1 Special Mission Unit," she said. "My clearance level prohibits specifics. I have served for over a decade in operational planning, intelligence coordination, and international threat assessment." Boom. You could feel the room tilt on its axis. Half the audience blinked. Karen actually stumbled backward a step, her binder slipping slightly in her hands. Then, from the far end of the council dais, an older councilman sat up straighter. He smiled, the slow, respectful smile of someone recognizing a warrior. "Thought I recognized you," he said. "Welcome home, ma'am." And just like that, the air shifted. Karen tried to rally. She started ranting about deep state infiltration, about military intimidation of private citizens, about coordinated smear campaigns. It didn't work. It couldn't work. The council members weren't buying what she was selling. Not after seeing the evidence. Not after hearing the truth. When the council president finally spoke again, his words were final and heavy. "Effective immediately, all HOA activities and financial operations are suspended pending full audit. Further, any fines, enforcement actions, or citations issued under the previous administration are considered null and void until legal clarification. And Ms. Brewster," he gave her a long, hard look, "you are under investigation for criminal misconduct." Karen sagged into her chair like a puppet with its strings cut. The crowd didn't cheer. This wasn't that kind of victory. It was better. It was quiet. It was absolute. And Sarah? She simply gathered her folder, nodded once, and walked out of the room. Mission complete. Target neutralized. You would think, after being publicly eviscerated at the city council hearing, Karen Brewster might finally take the hint and retreat with whatever dignity she could scrape off the pavement. You would be wrong. 2 days after the hearing, Sarah decided to deliver printed summaries of the audit to a few neighbors who had missed the meeting. Nothing dramatic, just a casual stroll in broad daylight, wearing her Love Thy Neighbor sweatshirt and carrying a reusable canvas tote filled with neatly stapled packets. That's it. No banners. No bullhorn. No flaming pitchforks. But Karen, apparently laboring under the delusion that she was still queen of this HOA kingdom, decided this was an act of war. From the clubhouse, now more like a haunted bunker, Karen dispatched her last, best hope, Captain Clipboard himself. The man, the myth, the tactical vest-wearing cautionary tale. He fired up the HOA golf cart, revving its tiny electric engine like he was in a Fast and Furious sequel no one asked for, and came roaring down the street at a breakneck 5 miles per hour. I was sitting on our porch, iced tea in hand, when I heard the unmistakable whine of impending idiocy. Sarah glanced over her shoulder, saw him barreling down, and, without breaking stride, simply stepped off the sidewalk and onto the grass. Captain Clipboard didn't adjust. Maybe he thought she would freeze like a deer in headlights. Maybe he thought he could perform a citizen seizure of her audit packets. Or maybe he just didn't see the landscaping trench. You know, the one that the HOA had promised to fill 3 summers ago?
Yeah.
That trench. The golf cart's front tire hit the dip like it had struck a landmine. There was a screech of cheap rubber, a wobble, a slow-motion moment where you could practically hear the driver's brain frantically paging through bad options, and then the entire cart tipped sideways, did a sad little barrel roll, and landed squarely in a bed of honeysuckle bushes. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't run. She calmly walked over, plucked her tote bag from the tangled seatbelt, and, with all the grace of someone handing a consolation prize to a losing contestant, dropped a granola bar next to the moaning wreckage. "In case you're in there a while," she said, before strolling off toward Mrs. Hillman's house, packets in hand, ponytail swinging. I might have blacked out from laughing. Of course, someone filmed it. Of course, it hit the local Facebook group within an hour. Then Nextdoor. Then somehow TikTok. And before sunset, there were memes. Golf cart gate, they called it. One edit had Sarah walking away in slow motion while an explosion went off in the background. Another had the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme playing as the cart flipped. My personal favorite was a still image of Captain Clipboard, half submerged in honeysuckle, with a caption, "Home Safety Division, expect us." Karen tried, she tried, to issue a statement later that evening. Something about unprovoked attacks on community officers and reckless endangerment. Nobody cared. Nobody listened. The illusion of authority she had so carefully built crumbled completely. And all it took was one runaway golf cart, a trench, and a woman who didn't have to run to win. From our porch, iced tea in hand, I watched the neighborhood laugh itself back to life. Sarah just smiled, shrugged, and said, "I told you." They were never ready. The HOA didn't go out with a bang. It went out with a whimper. One morning, without fanfare or final threats, the clubhouse doors were chained shut. The Home Safety Division golf carts disappeared like bad dreams at sunrise. Karen Brewster's laminated badge and tactical fantasies were quietly packed away, probably next to her collection of clipboards labeled important. It was over. The residents, sensing the shift, wasted no time. Within 48 hours, the neighborhood organized something it hadn't seen in years, a block party. No permits. No fines. No mandatory dress code for porch decor. Just grills smoking under the golden afternoon sun, folding tables covered in homemade pies and potato salad, and music that thumped cheerfully against the curbs and cracked sidewalks that Verdant Horizon had never repaired. Sarah and I wandered through the crowd, plates in hand, watching the world stitch itself back together. Kids shrieked with laughter as they raced each other barefoot across lawns. Someone handed me a cold beer. Someone else slapped Sarah on the back and called her the sheriff we actually needed. Toward the end of the night, as the stars blinked awake overhead, Mrs. Hillman, the unofficial new queen of community sanity, handed Sarah a slim, unmarked envelope. Inside was a letter, a commendation, from the Department of Defense. It wasn't flashy. No medals, no headlines, just a simple, formal acknowledgement of exceptional conduct in civilian oversight under defense of constitutional rights. The kind of letter you didn't frame for the hallway. The kind you kept somewhere safe. Somewhere only you could see it when you needed to remember who you really were. Sarah smiled at it for a long, quiet moment. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her jacket without a word. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could finally settle into the peace she'd fought so hard to protect. And for a little while, we did. But peace isn't always a permanent thing for people like Sarah. It was late, past midnight, when the SUV pulled up. Black. Unmarked. Shining under the dim streetlights like something that didn't quite belong in our tiny world of block parties and lawn chairs. A man in a crisp suit stepped out. Military-cut hair. Quiet authority. No names. No handshakes. Sarah met him on the porch. They exchanged a nod. No words. She came inside briefly, moving with the calm efficiency I'd seen 100 times before every deployment, every mission. No drama. No fear. Just certainty. On my desk, she left a note. Handwritten. Simple. Final. Karen was just the warm-up. This is the mission. No signature. No details. No apology. I stood there, holding the note, while outside, the SUV's engine purred low and steady. I watched from the porch as Sarah climbed inside, her silhouette framed against the streetlight, and then the vehicle rolled away, disappearing into the dark like she'd never been there at all. I didn't chase after her. I didn't call her back. That wasn't how it worked. She had a job to do. And somehow, deep down, I understood that this quiet departure without fanfare or goodbye was her way of honoring everything we'd fought for here. The neighborhood would be fine. It had learned to stand up for itself, because she had reminded them how. I tucked the note into my pocket, felt its weight settle against my chest, and went inside. Tomorrow would come, but tonight, the world was finally quiet. And somewhere out there, Sarah Owens was already moving toward the next mission. Peace doesn't announce itself with fireworks or parades. It sneaks in quietly, through open windows, through the sound of laughter spilling into the streets, through the gentle clink of porch swings swaying in the breeze. In the weeks after Sarah left, Oak Hollow began to heal. The difference was immediate, almost surreal. Kids zipped down the sidewalks on scooters and bikes without glancing nervously over their shoulders. Parents set up impromptu lemonade stands, their kids waving handmade signs like tiny entrepreneurs. Dogs wandered happily across front lawns, leashes dangling, tongues lolling, no citations fluttering in their wake. Neighbors stopped just waving from a distance. They started talking again. Conversations stretched longer. Smiles came easier. The weight that had settled on the community like a thick fog had finally lifted, and in its place, there was light. The clubhouse, once the heart of Karen's reign of terror, reopened under entirely new management. Enter Tom Miller, retired postal worker, softball coach, and possibly the kindest man to ever rock a Hawaiian shirt at a city council meeting. Tom didn't bring a binder full of threats. He didn't issue warnings about lawn heights or barbecue smoke drift. Instead, at his first community gathering, he stood in front of the clubhouse, microphone in hand, and said, "Folks, it's real simple. We're neighbors. We take care of each other. Starting today, we have just one rule." He turned, dramatically, and unveiled the new sign that now stood proudly at the entrance to Oak Hollow. Rule 1. Don't be a jerk. That was it. No fine print. No appendices. No 17-page supplement of acceptable porch light colors during non-holiday months. Just one beautiful, perfect rule. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the entire neighborhood cheered, not out of obligation, but because they actually meant it. I found myself smiling more too. I'd walk Sparky, who, thanks to a complicated series of emotional blackmail efforts by neighbor Lisa, had unofficially become ours, and neighbors would wave, shout greetings, hand over fresh tomatoes, or still warm blueberry muffins just because. It was, for lack of a better word, normal. And after everything we'd been through, normal felt like a minor miracle. At night, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the world settle down. The street lamps flickered on without any official HOA decree about light pollution impact assessments. A group of teenagers set up a projector in a backyard and hosted impromptu movie nights. Someone painted a mural on the side of the clubhouse, a tree growing tall, its roots tangled together, with kids swinging from the branches. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it was ours again. Sometimes, I'd glance at the empty seat next to me and wonder where Sarah was. What mission she was on.
Who she was helping now.
I knew better than to hope for postcards. That wasn't her style. Her style was action. Quiet, steady, unstoppable. And somehow, even in her absence, her presence lingered, woven into the fabric of the community she helped set free. She had reminded us that freedom wasn't about rules printed on glossy paper. It wasn't about lawn measurements or mailbox paint.
It was about respect.
About standing up for yourself and your neighbors. About knowing when to say enough is enough. Sarah lit the fire. The neighborhood kept it burning. As I sipped my coffee and watched the stars prick holes in the velvet sky, I thought about the sign at the entrance.
Rule 1.
Don't be a jerk. Simple.
Direct.
A legacy she would have loved. And somewhere out there, in a place I couldn't follow, I knew Sarah Owens was smiling too.